All right. Hi, Rabbi Adam. Thank you for finding the time to speak with the Auckland Jewish community. Much appreciated. More people joining in. So 1 second. I'll introduce you in 1 minute. All right, let's start. Welcome, everyone. Tonight we have Rabbi Professor Adam Ferziger. Rabbi Adam is a Samson Years Chair in Torah and Modern Culture, Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry, Bar Ilan University, and he will talk to us tonight about navigating halachic conflict in modern times. If you have questions in the end, I'm sure Rabbi Adam will give opportunity to ask questions. So please write it down and we will give time to ask. So Rabbi, mic is yours.
Okay, so I was about to say good morning, and you can see I have my morning coffee with me. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's really a privilege to be with you. I hope you hear me well from Kfar Saba in Israel. Noam, if you could record. Okay, it's recording, good. It's really, I've had a little bit of contact with the New Zealand community, always very, very positive. Not only did my second son do the complete top to bottom hike, he's very proud of it, but other children have spent time in the community and enjoyed it very much. So it's nice to be able to, people were very hospitable to them when they came to New Zealand. So it's nice to give back a little bit. Okay, so let's get right to our discussion. And I'm going to give a presentation that focuses on Jewish and specifically Orthodox approaches towards deviance or the deviant, meaning people who deviate, who move away from the normative or what's accepted halachic approaches. It's not going to be overly technical. I'm going to focus on 4 approaches and explain them pretty briefly. And then I'm going to expand on examples. And I want to talk a little bit about more classic, from a modern perspective, examples of issues that have been discussed at length. For example, status of people who are members of non-Orthodox communities, conservative, reform, etc. Status really meaning relationship to, how do we interact, how do we navigate, etc. People who are members of the Orthodox community, like so many of us, which has become sort of normative onto itself, of who are not necessarily abiding by the formal, strict rules of Orthodoxy, nonetheless identify with that community, and how the Orthodox tradition over the last 200 years in particular has developed. But I want to actually focus, and this was a tip-off, at some point in our discussion on the issue specifically of LGBTQ, homosexuality, same-sex people who are in same-sex relationships, because it's an issue that is confronting many of us, and it's an issue that is very current in society. And I do want to say that yes, I have smicha. I am a rabbi. People do ask me halachic questions. My interaction with you here certainly is enriched by my rabbinic knowledge.
1 second. Seems like. Okay, I'll text them. One second, it's coming back. Sorry for that. Please wait 2 minutes. Rabbi Adam is coming back in 1 minute. Sorry.
Hi, I am back just as I was connecting with my phone. So let me just turn off my phone, and I'm sorry about this. There's a terrible rainstorm going on in Israel as we speak. I mean, rainstorms are never terrible in Israel. They're great. On the contrary, we love rain, but it might knock out the internet here and there. No, am I good? Okay.
Yeah.
As I said, I'm not a posek. I'm not a halachist in a formal sense. Happy to share with you opinions and happy to discuss it. I am open to questions and happy to have a very frank discussion based on mutual respect and a great deal of importance that I believe we must have as human beings, as religious human beings, as Jews, in empathy to every human being and embracing people. And that is my perspective from the get-go. And that doesn't mean that everything is pluralistic, but my point of departure is human love and empathy towards all. Okay, now from a formalistic perspective, you know, I actually Noam, can I switch screen to seeing everybody? I like to see the gallery. Okay, that's good for me, or quite a few of you. Anyone who wants to go on screen, I teach a lot on Zoom, so I'm used to it. But if you want to show your face, that really helps a lot, and that would be great. Thanks, Adina. Thanks, Arbel. That's great. Okay, anybody else who wants to join us, that's fantastic. Okay, so I think that we'll start with this. And I wrote a book. It's called Exclusion and Hierarchy. That was published a bunch of years ago. And it's about the development of orthodoxy in its approach to non-observant Jews. And it starts in the 18th century and it goes into the 20th century. And it basically says the following. If you look at the classic sources, from the Talmud, from even biblical sources, Talmud, medieval sources, the Maimonides, Rabbi Joseph Caro's Shulchan Aruch, and into the 18th, early 19th centuries, there's pretty big consensus. Today we would call it draconian. The word would be exclusion, and the words exclusion, coercion. The Bible says that not violating the Sabbath is a capital transgression in literal sense. The same goes for male homosexuality, at least. Just to give those two examples that we're focusing on. We can discuss whether you need to have witnesses, how many witnesses, what kind of court, do you have to warn people in advance, all sorts of technical legal stuff. But on the foundational level, a simple reading of the Bible takes that direction. And for the most part, the Talmudic discussions and later medieval commentaries do as well. The approach is in or out. The approach is binary. The approach is people who want to be part of the Jewish community have to abide by certain very clear lifestyle issues, whether it's regarding the Sabbath, regarding kashrut, regarding their relationships, and many subjects. And not only that, but Jewish life, both in Sephardic and Ashkenazic areas around the world, were very much autonomous frameworks in which there was a lot of communal authority, rabbis, Beit Din, the religious court, and people who didn't abide, who deviated, could be punished, could be excluded. They could be put in different levels of cherem, of excommunication. Now, we don't have that many historical records to know how much people were really excommunicated for these things or not, but kind of the threat of it in itself was powerful, palpable. There was no neutral society. There was no secular society. If you were a Jew living in Germany or Poland, the only real choice for most people was to convert to Christianity. If you were living in Morocco, to convert to Islam. If you wanted to stay Jewish, there was a pretty monolithic definition of Judaism. Now, it's not really a historical discussion. I can share with you various deviances here and there, like Jewish criminals who hung out with Christian criminals, a lot of literature on that, and various allowances for various situations. The most common, or the most, I guess, the most famous being when Jews were forcibly converted, or you know, in Spain or something like that, where rabbis were very tolerant about letting them back and offering them portals of entry back into Jewish life. So certainly we have records from before the modern period in which we see that rabbis and communities did make efforts to embrace Jews who had, so to speak, gone off the path. But generally speaking, that was in situations in which they were forced to do so. When people voluntarily deviated, that wasn't very well accepted. The deviations that we see that were more accepted, and this is important even for the modern period, were ideological, were theological. There's a lot more variance, a lot more diversity in Jewish theology, in Jewish philosophy, in pre-modern discourse than in many ways there is today. And to a certain degree, and I'm throwing out a lot here at you, but to a certain degree, that's a reflection of sort of the fear of many authorities that if people are too free thinking, that will lead to free behavior. When behavior is more monolithic, when there's a clarity regarding what are the standards of day-to-day lifestyle, then there seems to be more tolerance of diversity of thinking. It's interesting. It might sound counterintuitive to some of you, but actually the modern life has, in a way, made Orthodoxy more monolithic because it is so protectionist regarding the incursions of reform or of secular society or of various forms of, say, contemporary individualism, etc. If I'm speaking too quickly, Noam, Elisheva, or anybody else, you guys can stop me. Okay, so far we okay? Good. I always assume that I'm with people who like to raise the level, not the opposite. But if I'm wrong, please tell me. Okay. So what happens in the 18th century and beyond? Well, the world changes, starting in Western and Central Europe, and then moving over to Eastern Europe and various aspects of the East, and then, of course, in the Western Hemisphere, and certainly when Jews find their way to down under, to Australia, to New Zealand, etc. It's a different world, and there isn't the same type of communal authority to a certain degree. I have to admit, I've spent some really nice time in Australia. My son was a shaliach of Torah Mitzion, of the Hester boys in Sydney, and I really did get to know the Sydney and Melbourne communities pretty well. I was in Leewood there in Melbourne. It was amazing, and I even got to do some great diving in Cairns and the Great Barrier Reef. So I do know Australia better than New Zealand, but I apologize for that. Maybe one day I'll get to know your community better too. So what happens? Well, Jews get let in. In many ways, the monolithic quality of Jewish lifestyle was the fact that the non-Jews allowed it to happen, or they enforced it. There was very strong separation. In the modern world, increasingly, Jews are emancipated. They are given the ability to integrate within non-Jewish society, and communal authority, rabbinic authority, declines because Jews become citizens. Jews are no longer under the civil authority of the rabbis, and to a great degree, they're not under the religious authority either. Judaism, and this is one of the most important things I'm going to say, I think everyone knows it, but it's just a very good way to articulate it. What defines modern Judaism in every shape and form, and I mean Reform Judaism, conservative, Reconstructionist, modern Orthodox, Haredi Orthodox, Hasidic, Neturei Karta, Gush Emunim, any Judaism that you have today, the common denominator is that it is voluntary. It is based on choice. There is no longer any such thing as religious coercion. Even a child born into a Satmar Hasidic family in Brooklyn or a Vizhitz family in Bnei Brak has the choice. They get on the bus. They see society. It may be harder. There may be family pressure. There may be all sorts of influences. But nonetheless, there is a neutral society. There is an alternative. I don't want to go into it now, but Israel is actually complicated that way in a way because there are certain laws regarding bread on Passover, certain Sabbath laws that make Israel a sort of post-traditionalist society where there is a little bit of governmental coercion in areas of marriage, divorce, etc. But that's another discussion. Maybe I'll come back for that one another time. Okay, so what happens when Jews don't have to behave the way the rabbis would like to, but the community, there are still people who are very much committed to Jewish life. There are still what I call a choosing community of orthodoxy, a community of the faithful that has chosen to remain committed to traditional, historic, or we'll call it what they consider to be authentic Judaism. So they have rabbis. They say, we're going according to the halakha, just like we always did. So how do they navigate their relationship to their non-Orthodox, so-called deviating brethren? And how do they navigate this unbelievable tension between the fact that an Orthodox Jew, by definition, is allegiant to the Shulchan Aruch, to the Code of Jewish Law of Rabbi Joseph Caro. Whether he abides by it or not, that's his constitution. That's her constitution. And if he looks in that Shulchan Aruch, it says some really draconian things about Jews who are not like them. How do they navigate that situation? So I want to present for you 4 basic approaches that I have identified within rabbinic literature, within the response literature, within discussions, and there are subgroups as well, but these are the basic categories. Number 1, rejection, which basically means we are the tzava katan v'ya'il. We are the small army of God. We are the faithful. Everybody else is wrong, and therefore we should minimize our interrelationship with those people, whether it be Sabbath desecrators, whether it be theologically reformed Jews, whether it be atheists, whether it be secular Zionists, to the degree that we can, chadash asur min haTorah, that which is new is biblically forbidden, and therefore we should create walls. We should self-impose so-called ghettos. We should not let the ghetto walls fall. We should create communities, whether it be in Brooklyn or Stanford Hill, or in maybe parts of a little bit in Melbourne, maybe Caulfield a little bit, or whether it be in Mea Sharim in Jerusalem, or Chatzor HaGlilit in the north. Wherever one goes, one should hermetically seal as much as possible. It's not 100%, but we reject the alternative Jewish theologies or lifestyles that have emerged, and therefore we are going to do our best, and our main efforts are on clarifying to our children, to our communities, that these people, they call themselves Jewish, but that is not real Judaism. Yes, the halacha distinguishes between them and people who are not Jewish, but we want to focus on clarifying the boundaries. That's approach number 1. Approach number 2, which I believe to be the dominant approach, I would call it tolerance. Excuse me 1 second. What does tolerance mean? Tolerance, in a Lockean manner, does not mean agreeing. Tolerance means that I agree to disagree, but I think I'm right. So I don't necessarily think I'm not talking about myself, I'm saying a person who is a tolerant rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, could be progressive in the sense that they don't think that Reform Jews are bad people, or that people who don't keep Shabbat are necessarily doing something that doesn't make them bad, but it's not okay, and I embrace them, but I look at the fact, I focus on the fact that they do some very fundamental things not well, and that seems to define them. So I tolerate them, I include them, but I would say on a lower level. In my book, Exclusion and Hierarchy, I coined the term hierarchical Judaism, which basically says that there's a big tent, but rather than an in-out binary where you have a line, and then there are the Orthodox Jews on one side and everybody else on the other side, you have horizontal lines, so to speak, where you have Orthodoxy on top and then different levels below. So within a hierarchy, like any hierarchy, everyone's part of the building, everyone's part of the tent. Nonetheless, the Orthodox will assert that they are on the top, that they are the ideal Jews. And I just want to explain that position and why I think it's dominant. I think it's dominant, and I'm not giving all the sources here, but I think it's dominant because because you can't. Most people don't want to reject their cousins and their relatives and their children and their friends. They don't. And the idea that Judaism is not just a church, Judaism has an ethnic or a national or a family or a tribal quality is very, very fundamental to Jewish identity. And therefore, that was always part of Judaism. Sinai in Egypt. The Jews become a people when they leave Egypt. They become a religion when they get the Torah, but it came together within a very short time. So if one takes the rejectionist position, they are maybe highlighting, celebrating the religious element in Jewish identity, but they are demeaning. They are erasing the tribal or family aspect of Judaism. So most people think they're both important. The question is, how do you navigate? How do you create the balance? So the dominant Orthodox position has been a tolerant one. The hierarchical one, though, is what I identified is very important. And it's not so nice necessarily, but basically it says the following: I want to embrace every Jew, but I still want to educate my children and my community. And if I don't place the Orthodox or the Halachic approach on a pedestal above every other approach, then why should my children and why should my B'nai Akiva kids, and why should the kids in the school or in the camp, why would they want to strive to raise their level of observance if everything is pluralistic, if everything is essentially acceptable and on an equal playing terms? So the hierarchical approach is one which facilitates a big tent that all of Am Yisrael, all of the Jewish people are a part of, yet it creates a system which allows for types of boundaries that can be aspirational, so to speak, regarding people who have not accepted full observance. In many, many communities, the hierarchy is very binary. It's the rabbi and everybody else, which is not a classic Jewish position. It's much more of a Catholic position. Maybe it's the temple position of the Kohanim, the priests, versus the rest of the nation once upon a time. But the position of this vast abyss, gap between the priestly or rabbinic class and the people is not one which is sort of organic to the halachic way, which allows for every person in their home and on the street and in everywhere they live to be able to articulate or to function without the need for holy people around to be the ones that are holding the flame up. Nonetheless, in many, many communities, there is that big gap between the rabbi, maybe the cantor, maybe some of the teachers, maybe the Israeli shaliach, I don't know, and the community. And I'm not judging it. It's just a reality. I'm describing it. Okay. The fourth position, I'll go back to the third position, the one I want to highlight. The fourth position is pluralism. Pluralism means that there is no hierarchy. Pluralism means that we tolerate everybody, and ish be'emunato yichya. Each person, male or female, shall live according to their beliefs and their practices, and there is no proper way to be Jewish. What's proper is that Judaism is important, and Judaism is dynamic and is alive, and every person, every individual, and this is particularly meaningful in a postmodern age where there's an assumption of everyone has their perspective and everyone lives in multiple spaces, just like we are on the screen right now. And everybody sort of vacillates between levels of engagement and levels of meaning. So the pluralistic approach would say that, you know, each one has their own truth, because there is no absolute truth. If there is no absolute truth, how can one make truth claims, which is which is very challenging. And this is, again, another discussion to any monotheistic religion. If a monotheistic religion, but monotheistic religions are based on truth claims. And there's a reason why Eastern types of religions, which are not based on truth claims, have gained a tremendous amount of currency in contemporary society. But a monotheistic religion, at least at base, would like to claim some level of exclusive truth. And that is very contrary to post-Holocaust, certainly late 20th, early 21st century, I would say, dominant types of thinking in the Western world. Okay, so I'm saying a lot, but you can engage later on. Okay, the position that I think is maybe most interesting is a position that was expressed by an individual that I had the privilege of actually studying with for many years and having a relationship with him. But after towards the end of his life, when I was last in touch with him, I actually was asked to write an article about him, and I spent a huge amount of time writing an article. His name was Rabbi Dr. Aaron Lichtenstein, and he was a very interesting person. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was child of refugees from Europe, came to America, studied with Rabbi Soloveitchik. At the age of 22, 23, he left yeshiva to go to Harvard, where he studied English literature, and he wrote a PhD based on that focused on Christian humanists, on people like Henry Moore, John Milton. He was also very interested in theologians like Cardinal Newman, Rudolf Otto, C.S. Lewis, famous writer, etc. He, after a stint as a head of one of the main lecturers in Yeshiva University, he made Aliyah. He moved to Israel, and he came to a place called Yeshivat Har Etzion, Gush, where he, together with his co-head, Rabbi Yehuda Amital, built a yeshiva, a Hesder yeshiva, where the students, and I'm not sure if Noam attended there or not, but I did, and so did my son. They combine army service with Torah study for 5 years, and most of them afterwards go to university. Today there are graduates of that yeshiva who are great rabbis and very important rabbis. They're also Supreme Court members and many of my colleagues, professors in universities, a lot of rabbi professors. I'm actually writing a book now about that whole framing of religious Zionism that was kind of on the outs until recently and has sort of emerged as a stronger voice. It's still a minority voice, but a stronger voice within contemporary Israel. In any case, Rabbi Lichtenstein devoted a lot of his writing to the issue of his relationship to Jews who were not Orthodox in various ways. And he started writing already in 1962 when he was in his early 30s. Or actually he's still in his 20s, where he wrote about the famous Brother Daniel case in Israel about a young person who had been hidden by a convent during the Holocaust and had converted to Christianity, had become a monk, and then asked to make Aliyah, asked to come to Israel based on the law of return, and whether they were considered Jewish if they were biologically Jewish, even though they were he was a practicing Catholic. And he wrote an interesting article about that. But throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, until his death in 2014, I believe, he wrote consistently on this issue. And what I found was that he represents a fourth approach. And the approach I called, in the article I wrote about it, fragmentary Judaism. What does fragmentary Judaism mean? It means that even the most tolerant approaches are total or holistic. Even the approaches that say we have to embrace the non-observant Jew, or a Jew who does not behave according to the strictures of the halacha. They define the Jew through their relative observance or non-observance. A mechalel Shabbat, a Sabbath desecrator. Yes, we are tolerant of modern Sabbath desecrators, but they are Sabbath desecrators. The secular Zionist, the Reform Jew, the homosexual, the whatever category you want to give. And what I found with Rabbi Lichtenstein is that rather than looking in this total way, he took what I call a fragmentary approach and looked at the various elements in the person and celebrated the ones that he liked, or liked is the wrong word, celebrated the ones that he felt were positive contributions to Judaism and to their Jewish persona and to the community, and acknowledged the areas in which he disagreed with them. But he didn't look at that as a litmus test of in or out, but rather tried to sort of look at them in different ways. And I want to show you a source now. No, do I have access?
Yeah.
And read it with you from one of his later writings, and then I want to explain it to you briefly, and then actually explain for a minute how I think he got to this. I don't have shareability so far. Let me see. No, can you give me shareability?
Yeah. Can you try now?
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Let me. Here. Okay, just tell me if you could see it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm reading from the one, it says E Rav Tarbutiyut. I translated it, fine. He said the following. Not a few within our block, this was written in 1997. Not a few within our block tend to see the secular camp as an empty vessel, lacking any positive content. In other words, they tolerate them because they're Jews and we're all brothers. But if they look at anything relative to who they to their lifestyle, they reject it. Oh, they're secular. How could they not have God? How can they not have Shabbat? How can they not have all these things? And they're focused on the negativity. Even more severe, they rejoice as soon as they perceive that all within the other side is defective: deterioration, drugs, permissiveness, every affliction and sickness, happiness possesses them. In other words, they're looking for the stains. The Orthodox are always looking to say, you see what happens when you're Reform? You see what happens when you're homosexual? You see what happens when you're a Sabbath desecrator? By us, all is excellent, while anyone who doesn't attend synagogue eventually will enter a brothel. So now that's his description of an approach that he's seen. And now he's going to reject it. Such responses are horrifying and flawed both morally and halachically. I think and hope that we have no monopoly on good and splendor. I can't accept the full secular system. I disagree. I think that God is a big part of our lives. I think that the Torah, the halacha are central to Jewish existence. But I am fully aware that it contains within it, meaning the secular system contains within it, many ingredients that are deserving of considerable appreciation. And he lists some of them: devotion to acts of kindness, aspiration towards truth, development of human capabilities, creativity, and certain aspects of equality. All these characteristics of secular society are deserving of admiration, sometimes even sources of jealousy. I'll come back to him in a minute. But his point being is, it's not, we got all the good and they got all the bad, but we're going to accept them anyway. On the contrary, I can disagree with someone and feel that they are rejecting certain fundamental aspects of our heritage and tradition, and still embrace them, not embrace them, respect them, learn from them, appreciate them. And he gave his examples, but in other sources there, he talks about his interaction with a Reformed theologian that he found to be an extraordinarily spiritual human being. He argues what I would consider to be a very powerful, but a very, very complex approach. And that complex approach is that we don't do what is so easy is to stereotype people. We try to look into the individual. It is individualized oriented, but it doesn't mean that we have to be pluralistic in order to appreciate the good. And I said I was going to explain where I think it comes from. So I'm going to say this very quickly. It's a whole article. I thought for a minute, maybe the reason he is so able to appreciate the good in people he disagrees with is because he was such a great Talmud scholar. He was really one of the most important Talmud scholars of the last 30, 40 years. Really such a Talmid Chacham. And I thought to myself, anyone who reads Talmud knows that Talmud is the most sort of diverse book you ever read. It always has, it's all based on machloket. It's all based on arguments. And when you learn Talmud, not in order to know what to do on the Sabbath or on Passover or on Purim, you don't learn it to focus on what's the final decision. You learn it to understand each side. And I thought to myself, well, this rabbi, he got it. He's been learning Talmud for so long that he realized that there's value even in the opinion of Shammai, even if we accept Hillel. And there's an opinion of Rabbi Meir, even if we accept Rabbi Yehuda, et cetera, et cetera. And that sort of made me very happy because it seemed like a very authentic sort of foundational Jewish approach. But I'm sorry, I came to the conclusion that I was wrong. It was really nice. You know why? Because so many people study Talmud. And unfortunately, I don't see most people who study Talmud reaching his conclusion. So maybe it's possible to derive it from the Talmud, but it doesn't seem that the Talmud itself facilitates that type of complex, fragmentary approach. What I do think, though, is that the only way a yeshiva bacher can go to Harvard and spend 4 years studying Christian humanists who are very religious people, who are very connected to God, and appreciate the way that their connection to God is the foundation for their morality, is to take a fragmentary approach. If he spent his whole time in Harvard rejecting John Milton, that wouldn't be very productive. If he spent his whole time in Harvard celebrating Cardinal Newman and thinking that Catholic ethical theology is the be-all and end-all, that wouldn't be very good for a Rosh Yeshiva. That ability to tightrope, to navigate, the ability to appreciate the humanistic and moral and even theologically God-loving approach of these Christian humanists, while being very clear about the fact that his allegiance to Orthodox Halachic Judaism was very firm and strong, I think that that's the foundation for his approach to Jews with whom he disagreed. I want to go back to that, to his sources, and then I want to conclude and open up to questions or comments. Okay, so here's where this idea of fragmentary I got from a quote from a book that appeared in 2011, in which he was interviewed by another actually interesting rabbi and scholar, Chaim Sabato, who's a great author, if anyone's read any of his books. He says the following: the spiritual and ethical portfolio of portions of this group, meaning non-Orthodox, contains lofty and important matters of significant moral meaning. To say empty wagon, to say that their wagon is empty, that they have nothing that is positive, implies that they have nothing which isn't better than we have. This is something that I believe to be factually false, and I also have no interest in reaching such a situation. Now he says something very interesting about how he trains his own students. I think that the proper Jewish ethical religious position is to be capable of recognizing and appreciating things that are fragmentary, partial, chelki. I say to my students, if you think of becoming a rabbi, go to the rabbinate with recognition and appreciation for fragmentary things. So he says, not just everyday people, but here I'm saying this to every one of you. I'm sorry. Now I am opinion. Think of it, whether you're a rabbi or a teacher or a communal leader or a parent or a brother or a sister. Think about the moral and ethical force of a fragmentary position that does not judge people, whether it be in the religious realm or the social or civil realm, based on one particular area in which you strongly disagree with them. It's a profound idea It may seem simple, but it's profound morally. It's also profound psychologically, because it's so difficult for many of us to do this. And we so often focus in on those areas in which we disagree, or which irk us, or which cause us pain. And we so often do not have the ability, whether it be in a religious context or in a personal, family, or interpersonal context, to balance between those various areas. Now, I said that I want to get to the issue of homosexuality. How does Lichtenstein extend this to homosexuality? I want to show you an interesting source in an interview that was also, I think, around 2013. Okay. He says, he was asked, what is his feeling about homosexuality in our day? And he says the following: check a computer or concordance for wherever the word to'eva appears, and see to what does it apply. Now, the word to'eva, which is translated as abomination, is the word which is used in Leviticus in reference to male homosexuality. To'eva, abomination. And very often in I guess you would call it anti-homosexual or anti-GLBT type of discourse, in the religious context, they scream, to'eva, to'eva, abomination, it's an abomination, whether it be Jewish homophobia or whether it be evangelistic homophobia. Abomination, to'eva. So he says, let's check. So you discover that to'eva in the verse in Ezekiel refers to people who don't feed aniyim, poor, properly. Or you open a Chumash, a Bible in Kitetze, if you are dealing with weights and measures, and you cheat a little bit on the weights and measures, that's to'eva too. Abomination is something that's used to apply to a very broad range of sins, usually ones that have to do with ben adam l'chavero, between human beings. Having done that, find for me a community which responds and relates to homosexuality as if you are doing something terrible, just like it responds to those who are cheating a little bit on weights and measures or taxes or anything else. Is it proper? Is it fair? And I say this without relenting to our opposition to homosexuality, to decide that all sins which the whole entire Jewish community has, all of that we can swallow and march with them, with pride and with their flags and everything that they want. But this is the scapegoat dispatched to Eretz Gzerah, to a barren land. So here's application of fragmentary Judaism. And I want to make it clear. Remember, a pluralistic, a rejectionist approach would be abomination, abomination. A tolerant approach would be, we accept you, we're not going to protest you, but, you know, we look at you as someone who is aberrant. A pluralistic approach would be the accepted Western discourse, which is that sexuality, like everything else in life, is pure choice and that is immoral, especially according to those people who think that sexual preference is nature more than nurture, to have any qualms or any disagreement or opposition regarding a person's sexual behavior, preference, identity. Lichtenstein is not a pluralist. And I'm not here to excite or disappoint people. I just want to lay it out. He is not a pluralist. He thinks that homosexuality is a sin. But there are many sins. And it's not a bigger sin than other sins. And that's his point by saying that abomination can apply to many things. And he doesn't understand why people, he kind of understands it psychologically, because people often attack those things that they fear most. But from a religious perspective, why are we so tolerant? Well, he thinks we should be tolerant of everybody. I don't know. Why are we so tolerant of people who cheat on their taxes? Why are we so tolerant of people who are disgusting human beings in the synagogue or in various interactions, but somebody who in their private space, without hurting anybody else, behaves in a way which the Torah does not support, but they're not hurting someone, why does that become the sort of focus of so much belligerent type of discourse? Now, in practice, there are Orthodox rabbis who have taken this a step further, and they've come out with statements. For example, Rabbi Benny Lau in Israel made a statement that first of all, that in the synagogue context, whether it be leading the services or any minyan or any sort of public area, just like today we accept people with a wide variety of, we'll call it, deviances from halachic behavior, the person shouldn't be limited due to their sexual identity. The person shouldn't be denied an aliyah or the services or etc. That is an opinion. Not everyone agrees, but that is an opinion that has a strong backing by Benny Lau and some other. He also said that because we don't look at what people do in the bedroom, he thought that the fact that a person identifies as a homosexual doesn't mean that we have any personal, we can, it's not like we're naive, but, why are we looking? And therefore, if two men want to live in the same apartment as a couple, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing something that is evil or against the Torah law. Many people didn't like that because of that. They thought that was slippery slope to pluralism. And there was a lot of debate about that. In America, a group of Orthodox rabbis got together and put out a statement about the importance of inclusion within synagogue life, and the importance of particularly the fact that there shouldn't be a situation. I remember there was a kid who was in my class 2 years ahead of me in high school, in a Jewish high school in New York, was one of the best Torah learners. And he went to yeshiva in Israel, and he went on to get smicha, and he eventually became the principal of a very, very prominent Jewish high school called Yeshiva Flatbush. And one day I heard he quit his job, and the next thing I heard, he had left observance completely. And it turned out that he was a homosexual, and he was so tortured that he felt that he had been lying to the community for so many years, and eventually, as soon as he came out of the closet, he couldn't be observant. And this statement wasn't reacting specifically to that, but it was saying, of these American rabbis was saying, why should a person feel that because of their Orthodox identity, because of their sexual identity, they cannot be full members of the Jewish community? These should not be exclusive binaries. And rabbis in particular, and community leaders in particular, need to learn how to embrace without giving their hechsher, embracing a person. And when a bar mitzvah boy from a non-observant family comes up and gets an aliyah in shul, no rabbi is going to come up and say, and even though I love you and I'm so happy with you, I don't like the fact that your parents drove to shul this morning. No, they would never say that. They'd say, it's wonderful that you read the Torah. You did a beautiful job. You're continuing the traditions of your community. You are a fine member, and we hope you'll continue to come here and be a part of everything we do. So this is really an extension, and that's why I spend so much time talking about the development of Orthodox approaches to deviance, because the question is homosexuality a completely different level? The approach that I'm articulating here is not necessarily. I can certainly discuss issues of Jewish family and of the disintegration of Jewish family that come from contemporary, the ethos regarding individuality, etc., that have a strong foundation in certain types of radical feminism and gender discourse. But the approach that I've articulated to this point is the approach which says that in contemporary society, which is so diverse, Jewish communities, Orthodox included, have a path to take, which is a fragmentary path, which would not entail compromising foundational principles, but would focus on celebrating the good, the moral, the positive in every person who chooses to engage. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Rabbi Adam.
Wow.
Very, very interesting. I hope you see people clapping their hands. If anyone
Do you want me to call on people? I see, so far I see Ruben and I see Tanya. So I'm gonna, Ruben, do you want to start? And then Tanya, I think you were first, or did you lower your hand?
I think they're clapping for you. They're saying thank you.
Oh, that was a clap. That's a cute clap. That's good. Tanya, were you clapping? Let's, come on. I don't need claps. I'm in Israel. I don't even hear you. Give me some questions. Let's make it exciting. Come on.
So we'll give the floor to you guys. Anybody who wants to ask anything, it can be related to what Rabbi Adam just spoke about, and it can be anything you guys want to ask, maybe about the subject that he didn't speak about, or anything you guys want to say. Feel free. You can.
I think Elisheva went to Camp Moshava with my son Aviad, if I'm not mistaken.
Aviad. Oh, maybe.
Ferziger.
I was at Camp Moshava.
my son told me that. Yes. Kay, do you have a question there? Or are you just putting your fingers on your screen? You can unmute. I really want to hear the voice of, or the voices. I'm sure there are many voices. I'm sure you don't all agree on this. I'd like to hear, and don't worry about, I put on my bulletproof vest this morning, so you can really, my shachpatz, so you can really let me have it. You don't have to be polite.
May I say something? Is that okay?
Charlotte. Charlotta or Charlotte?
Hi. Charlotte, hi.
I
listened with some trepidation and anxiety, being one of the homosexuals that you were talking about. So I was feeling really quite anxious about what you were going to say. I've been with my partner for nearly 25 years and we have 2 children. And I'm in the process of converting. It's been about 18 months, and I'm very, very keen to convert to Orthodoxy, although I've been in the progressive movement. And it's the anxiety about their homosexuality and how I would be received by the community that's held me back. I have to say that Rabbi Friedler has been incredible. Like I walked out just gobsmacked. I was expecting the doors to be shut in my face, and that wasn't how I was received. But I still do have some concerns about the wider community and how they would feel about my family.
Did you, so you had trepidation, but you didn't tell me how you felt after you heard what was presented. Did it resonate to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was wonderful to hear that coming from you, and wonderful for the method of not losing the importance of halakha, but also be able to, as you said, to be a little bit more pluralistic in our approach. We're not saying let's scrap everything, that everything's not important, but we're saying, let's which one of it that doesn't do the wrong thing from time to time. And we're not really interested in what people do behind their bedroom doors, if they do anything at all, in fact. What we're actually interested in is, are you being a good person? And are you raising your children in the way that, in a Jewish way? And I think for me, I believe that God created us all perfectly who we are. And loves us all, and is looking at what we do now and how kind we are with each other. And I think that resonated really. I felt like you were saying, and I really appreciated hearing that.
So Charlotte, I'm glad. I do feel that there was a balance in what I was saying, and it's not a balance. It doesn't disagree with anything you said. It actually, I agree. But you know, not everyone is as brave as you, Charlotte, because you know that Orthodoxy has certain ideal standards, and the fact that you are willing to step in, knowing that there are aspects that are foundational to your lifestyle that don't that aren't in sync totally with that, is admirable, and it's brave. And yeah, I'm sure there will be challenges, but I'm sure even within contemporary society, no matter how tolerant, there's a variety of people within society, and one encounters, you know, just like as Jews, we encounter people who are more accepting, and there are people who are a little bit sketchy, and there are people who are downright disgusting. There are going to be people like that within Orthodox life. And a person, you know, my parents always taught me, Shakespeare said, "Till thine own self be true." And if we can be comfortable with our truth and be honest about who we are and not try to be put on facades, you know, hopefully that will come out. So thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you very much.
Other comments? Or yeah, Daniel?
It's Yael, actually.
Yael, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for talking with us. And I wanted to particularly say to Charlotte, because I've had the pleasure of chatting with her, that I know I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself in saying the way that you're received by the rabbi is the way that I feel you should be received in our community. So you already know how I feel about that. So I think a personal story is I come from Johannesburg originally, and one of my very, very dear friends had some difficulties with the South African Beth Din for this, on this topic. And it was, without going into the details, it was extremely traumatic for him, and he's a wonderful human being. So, I'm just basically saying that I'm agreeing with I totally agree with looking at, I'm not sure if I like the word fragmented, but partial. I think that's a really good word. And, and none of us does anything perfectly. So, accept everyone doing what they can and what resonates with them, on the understanding that none of us are doing everything. So really thank you, and thanks Elisheva, Noam, and Charlotte. Love the fact that you joined the call, and come on in.
So if I can pick up on Yael for 1 second, I'm just echoing things that I said already, but I think that something that Rabbi Luchling said, and it's one of the reasons I do prefer fragmentary to partial, is that partial implies that in this, there's this part that's good and this part that's not good. And fragmentary means that I look at all the different pieces. And to me, the fragmentary implies the possibility not just of being non-judgmental, but actually learning from. And that's one of the things that he says. He says, I can learn from every person if I look for those parts of the person which can enhance and enrich the meaning of my life. So when we encounter people within our families or within our broader communal framework who have behaviors that don't sit well with us, the fragmentary approach suggests that we explore ways in which we do connect and ways in which we can learn from them, whether in their devotion to prayer, or their chesed, their communal involvement, or their intellectual rigor, or their dedication of time to Torah study, or their philanthropy. There are many different ways that people express their connection. And the Torah does have a very high standard, and that is one that is aspirational. But the fragmentary approach indicates the possibility of learning not just from the tzaddik tamim, not just from the pure righteous one, and then everyone else is sort of, like I said, I think closer to the classic Catholic approach. I think that this affords the possibility of an interface between communal membership and growing from the interface, and not just from the top down sort of interactions.
Okay. And on that basis, so I just want to respond to say that they make sense, and I understand then why you're using the word fragmentary instead. Thank you.
Rabbi,
Tanya.
it is now Tanya speaking. I also realize I'm mysteriously dark because it's now getting later here, so I apologize.
You are not mysteriously dark. You are like in the shadows.
Yeah,
there used to be a TV show in America called Dark Shadows. Ruben thought that was, or Ruben Beatty thought that was really funny. But mysteriously dark, Tanya, what do you have to say?
First of all, thank you, and it's a pleasure to hear you again. I heard you at Limud in Melbourne about 10 years ago on something very different, and have looked forward to hearing you since then. But I wanted to ask specifically in relation to homosexual relationships, and taking into account Rabbi Benny Lau's statement and the fragmentary approach, but also the acknowledgement that you said a part of that approach that certain homosexual behaviour is still a sin. Do you envisage any framework in which Orthodox Judaism could recognise or sanctify homosexual relationships?
I was hoping someone would ask that question. No, I'm gonna answer. I'm not gonna skip the question at all. I'm gonna answer it straight out, but I'm gonna answer on two levels. And Tanya, push me if you feel, or anybody else, if you feel that I am being anything less than straightforward. My answer is that except for very, very fringe groups that might or might not still, groups that might call themselves halachic, but not necessarily orthodox. For example, Hadar, which is a egalitarian halachic framework that has a yeshiva and a rabbinical program in America, and has an institute in Israel, Ein Prat, maybe the Hartman Institute. I think that those frameworks would be more inclined to try to navigate the halachic system such as to sanctify those relationships in something probably similar to a lot of the literature that was produced in the 1990s in the conservative movement in the United States. And there's a big corpus of literature from the what's it called, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Conservative Movement. Within contemporary orthodoxy, and I mean, when I say mainstream, I mean except for the fringes, which I don't like to use categories because I think it's exclusionist. But you asked me a question. I think that within the institutions which self-define as orthodox, I do not see that as a reality in the present situation. Having said this, and this may be deemed a type of relativity, but I think it's systemic in a positive way. One of the things that is so foundational to traditional Judaism is its legal element. You know, early Christianity criticized Judaism for its jot and tittle, for being so focused on the legalities, on all the technicalities. The flip side of a religion which is so predicated on legality, Tanya, is that law evolves, and law is a system in which there's a constant back and forth. And if we go back to the example that I gave, if you asked a Jew, a rabbi living in 15th century Poland, or probably that would be 16th century, 15th century Alsace-Lorraine on the French-German border, if you ask them, a Jew who smokes in public on Sabbath, can that person get an aliyah in shul? They would say absolutely not. They're like a goy. They're like a Gentile. That's what the Talmud says. And here we go, 300 years later, Rabbi Jacob Ettlinger, the most important halachic authority in Germany in the mid-19th century, he redefines the modern Sabbath desecrator as a infant taken captive, as someone who is, their desecration isn't based on heresy, but it's based on the upbringing that they brought up. People like or don't like that statement, but regardless, that's an evolution in the halachic system. So in the current discourse, I don't see sanctification of same-sex relationships as being something that will be adopted by Orthodoxy, but Judaism and the halacha evolves, and I can't predict that things won't change, just like they have in many other categories. I hope that's an honest answer.
Yeah, that's an honest answer. Thank you. I just think it's interesting taking that legal approach, extrapolating from what you said before in terms of treatment of other sins, whether an Orthodox rabbi would agree to marry a couple who had explicitly decided they were not going to have children. And I suspect the answer is yes. And I just think, I'm not going to take any more of your time there, but I just think there are some interesting arguments based on the argument you gave before about equivalence, about how we treat certain sins or situations as against other ones, that perhaps say more about our approach to our moral judgment about certain sins as against others. But I'll leave it there because I think others might have
so I'm not going to leave it there because I might be getting myself in trouble, but you're raising an issue and I want to engage it because this is fun for me, and if it's boring anyone, I apologize. Here I think that I'm going to throw in something which might be a little bit of a bone, but we should be aware of it. And I'll give an example to illustrate. This issue can be looked at through the lens of moral equivalency. It can also be looked at through the lens of continuity of foundational values. And I want to jump to a completely different framing just to illustrate and then come back to the issue of same-sex relationships. About 100 and I forget how long ago electricity was invented, but it was 120 years ago or something, 140 years ago. And right away, all the rabbis had to think, well, is turning on a light on Shabbat permitted or not permitted? Is using various machines that are electrically run permitted or not permitted? And there were lots of discussions about all the technical reasons why it could be permitted or not permitted. What I find fascinating is that there's a lot of disagreement on why yes or why no, but all of them reach the conclusion that the Jewish law, I'm talking about Orthodox rabbis, reach the conclusion that according to Jewish law, it is forbidden to use to operate electrically run things on Shabbat, to operate them. You can turn them on before, you can even automatically turn them on, but you can't actively do that. Now, if you ask me, they saved Shabbat. They really, really saved Shabbat. I think that if we could have used electricity from 140 years ago, it would be really difficult to do Shabbat in the way that ideally one would like to. Because today we see it in its most extreme terms. So many of us, even if we keep Shabbat, the hardest thing in the world is to keep away from texting, checking our WhatsApp. It's become an extension of our hand. But there are different levels at which that has developed. There are actually people who started to keep Shabbat just to keep away from their handheld devices. So I could argue that those rabbis weren't basing themselves on formalistic law. They were basing it on a sense that this was about saving Shabbat. So extrapolating, and it's a little bit of an extrapolation, but Tanya, family in the, we'll call it monogamous form has become one of the foundations of Jewish values. It doesn't mean that if someone doesn't have children, or if someone is single, or if someone is in a is not in that type of relationship, they are excluded. But in terms of what is foundational to communal Jewish life values, that is the case. So I want to give you a really extreme example, and I didn't bring him up, but I wrote him down in my notes because I wanted to tell you about him. I don't think this is acceptable. I don't think that Orthodoxy would accept this position. It's a very interesting one. Some of you may have heard of a very important rabbi and theologian by the name of Yitzhak Greenberg. Yitzhak Greenberg grew up Orthodox. He was a rabbi of an Orthodox synagogue. He is self-defining as Orthodox, but he's certainly fringe in terms of his radical values. I actually edited a very interesting volume about him recently called Yitzhak Greenberg and Modern Orthodoxy, The Road Not Taken. He's a person I know personally and I respect very much. I don't agree with him on everything, but I respect him very much. I was at a rabbinical conference 2 years ago. I flew in for a day to Boston of a group of open-minded Orthodox rabbis, and there was a discussion of homosexuality in which a lot of these synagogue rabbis discussed issues that they confront regarding, let's say, Kaddish for spouses, for partners, sitting Shiva for non-Jewish same-sex partners, all sorts of issues that are very current in contemporary society. Rabbi Greenberg said the following thing. He said two things. He said that in 2010, he was asked to write an article in Judaism magazine. They asked a whole bunch of Jewish leaders how they would respond to if one of their children came out. And they had to write a letter as if one of their children came out. And he said, and I actually afterwards read the letter. The letter says the following. It says, my dear child, I love you no matter what. You've made a choice that from a Jewish perspective, is different than the ones that I believe to be foundational. However, I would not want to castigate you by any means. Within the choice that you made, I want to strongly encourage you to develop a loving, monogamous relationship with your partner and create a family, because family is a foundational Jewish value. And similarly, he said that when he looks at the biblical prohibitions, he sees them in the context of the immoral types of ways. Let's say in classical society, young boys were treated as sort of concubines for married men. And it was not part of a monogamous, healthy adult relationship. Now, again, I don't think most Orthodox rabbis would agree with that level of approach. Certainly the second. Nonetheless, the point that comes out, even with Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, who's more radical, is that there is something very, very foundational that we're struggling with, which goes way beyond the specifics of same-sex relationships. And that is the Jewish family and the degree to which, we're coming close to Seder. The Seder is about sitting with family. The Korban Pesach, the sacrificial lamb, had to be done in a chabura, in a group. Now, there are other forms of family, and I don't want to disrespect at all. Having said that, Tanya, I do think that there's a meta question here, which is very, very complex, and that we should not we should be very, very careful about the decisions we make based on even sometimes things which make it uncomfortable for individuals, if they may compromise something as fundamental as that. And sanctifying same-sex relation, on one hand, I can see compelling reason why that can actually strengthen the monogamous side of that relationship in a way that Greenberg might approve. On the other hand, other people might see it differently, and that's why I think it's a very complicated question. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
I think, Kay, do you want to ask a question? You need to unmute yourself.
Hey.
Unmute. Yeah, okay. Okay, just thank you very much, Rabbi. I enjoyed that. It was very interesting. Just a couple of comments. When you talk about the fragmentary path, as a teacher, that's something that we always try to do, because you always have the child who's so keen and interested, eager, and always gives the wrong answer. And you're always looking for things to say that's something good about them. When you're talking directly to them. So that's one thing that's used in teaching. I found it very interesting, your comment of tova, meaning abomination, because I had only ever seen that in the English in relationship to homosexuality. And so obviously it's used a lot more just for general sin. And it's interesting that that word has come out and been used just for homosexuality in English as well, probably in other languages, when it almost seems as though it's weighted just as badly as other things where we cheat on humanity, do something wrong, etc. And the last thing is, I really, really love that comment you made, or I think it's the other rabbi's comment, we need to learn to embrace without giving a heksha. I think that's a really good way of, if we have to stay within the bounds of halakha, I think that's an amazing way to express it. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad. It sounds like I'm glad to hear you were listening carefully. And what you said about teaching is important. It's a very hard thing. I'm a teacher, obviously, and it's a very big challenge, because you want to get to a certain level with your students, and you also want to encourage them. And I can tell you, especially on the university level, where I have doctoral students, and I'm trying to encourage them to push themselves to the max, but in a way which is positive. And I appreciate that comment. I have to think about that, how I can make sure to be encouraging without compromising the standards, without giving a hechsher to a bad proposal, or something like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? More questions?
Yep, I've got a question if that's all right.
Ruben.
Hey.
How's it going, Adam? Thank you for the
Ruben.
talk.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear you. Go ahead.
I unfortunately missed parts of your talk, so speak up if I'm touching over something that's already been said. But you said that tolerance, or the tolerance approach, was or is the most dominant in the modern Orthodox movement currently, and you said that we've transitioned to that gradually ever since the postmodern era. And I was just curious, do you think that the fragmentary approach will one day naturally displace the tolerance approach? And pretty much my question is, like, what do you think the path is for modern Orthodoxy future? Which path do you think will follow, or do you think we'll stick with the tolerance approach as dominant?
Reuben, that's great. I love your question. And my grandfather's name was Reuben, and my brother's name is Reuven. So I feel close to you. So there's optimism and there's reality. So I'll start with reality. I've been impacted very much by the sociological school of Émile Durkheim, who's a very important French sociologist, lived at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. One of the fields that he kind of pioneered and that was picked up by some other people in mid-20th century is the field of what's called sociology of deviance. Sociology of deviance says many things, but its basic point of departure is that it's easier to define who you are not than who you are. That group coalescence is a natural process of group coalescence is to define the other. And that through defining the other, groups define themselves. Not only that, but otherness changes over time. At one time, something could be accepted, and later on, under certain circumstances, it could be rejected when a group feels threatened. They feel a need to coalesce, to strengthen their sense of group connectivity. And vice versa. At other times, when a group feels more confident, more self-confident, they can be open to various levels of otherness or deviance that at other times they could not accept. So here I would say the following. So if you're interested in literature, Reuben, or anybody, you could look at a book by Kai Erickson called Wayward Puritans or Wayward Pilgrims, which is about the 17th century Puritan society in Massachusetts and the witch craze that you might be familiar with from Arthur Miller's The Crucible, or look at some literature by R.I. Moore about or Nachman ben Yehuda in Europe and witch hunting and leper hunting and Jew hunting and how European society sort of coalesced through those things. So that tells me, Reuben, that makes me kind of pessimistic, because as much as the fragmentary one in many ways converses well with postmodern discourse, I think human nature very much orients towards defining through the other, because it's so much harder to focus on one's positive. It's so much easier to say, oh, they're prettier than me, they're more religious than me, they're less religious than me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a tough battle. Here I'm going to throw in something maybe optimistic, but maybe kind of maybe provocative. There's actually an interesting Zionist element in all this. Israeli society, or I would say Israeli Judaism, presents a really interesting sort of avenue for looking at this issue. Of course, we all read about strife and about Haredim and this and secular, but on the other side of the coin, there's some really interesting literature that's developed recently that's talked about something called Israeli Judaism. And the sense that there is something that is new, that is rising in a sovereign Jewish society, which is very much tradition bound and very much focuses on the importance of various elements of tradition. Yet, because of the national, societal, common interest aspects of society, leads in a post-ideological era to a great deal of plurality. So once upon a time, just like Orthodox were extremely fervent in asserting their approach, so were secular kibbutzim. And secular kibbutzim were as ideological and as orthodox about their secularism as Haredim were about their orthodoxy. And today's Israeli society, the sovereignty seems to be evening the playing field a little bit and making people feel areas of commonality, which in a way neutralize some of the what you would call hard ideology as opposed to soft ideology. So optimistically, I do think that in Israeli society, the fragmentary approach is really, really existential. So for example, there's a reason why in Israeli society, in the end of the day, the biggest battle is, do you serve in the army or not? Because if people serve in the army and defend the country, then basically most people are willing to say, yeah, I can tolerate, you can be as Haredi as you want, you can be as secular as you want. We have this common thing where we're on the battlefield, there's the equalizer. If you're not on the battlefield, it gets a little bit more complicated. But my point being that I think that the fragmentary one actually, there's a reason that Lichtenstein moved more and more to the fragmentary one as he lived in Israel longer. I think it maybe emerges from that existence. I think that in Chutz La'aretz, in diaspora communities, on one hand, the non-Jewish other in certain ways becomes the other of living in a non-Jewish society often becomes the strongest factor in creating Jewish coalescence in a Durkheimian way. And sometimes that can also cause Jews to naturally, their proclivity to move to othering other Jews as well. But I don't think it's a binary, and I think that there's room for fragmentary, certainly within Jewish life worldwide. I just think that maybe the conditions for its fruition may be different, and it's something to think about a little bit more. I liked your question a lot, Ruben. Happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah, cheers for that answer. It's a lot to think about.
I see someone named Smart, or who's trying. Are you trying to engage, or not? Noam, should we say this was a great discussion?
It was amazing. Toda Rabba, Rabbi. It was unbelievable. I'll say refreshing, mamash, for us. I think also for you from the Jewish community in Auckland. So thank you very, very much.
So I want to say that I had very high expectations for this discussion, because I got the impression that this was a wonderful community, both from my son spending some time there and from just the very fact that you invited me and the premise for the invitation. I got the impression that there are people who want to learn, who want to study, who want to discuss. And I thank you very much. What an unbelievable, with all the terrible things we've been going through, although New Zealand has been a hero for all of us. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of almost, I feel like I'm in a mikvah. I feel like I'm in this like place where there's this one place in the world where when 3 people test positive, they shut down the whole society. It's unbelievable. I've had 2 vaccines. I'm okay. So you can, you know, no, but we're trying to protect everybody here. In any case, this is a very, very, very lovely engagement, and look forward to meeting you guys again. And Noam and Elisheva, kol hakavod, mamash kol hakavod ala ma'amatz. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
Hopefully in person next time. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you. Laila tov, everyone.
Laila tov.
Good night.
Thank you.
Laila tov.
Laila tov.